He's a member of the National Policy Council of the Arab American Institute. Omar, thank you so much for being with us. What does this first phase of a deal mean for the Palestinian people? Have you heard from folks on the ground?
Yeah, it's incredibly meaningful to see after 2 years of, frankly, a genocidal war that has completely devastated the Gaza Strip. I mean, this onslaught has broken so many records in terms of the number of journalists who've been killed, the number of medics, the number of UN workers, and even the sheer number of children who have been dismembered or lost their lives in it. So any end to that is certainly welcome, and you can see it in the joy that we have seen in the images coming out of Gaza. Unfortunately, there are many unanswered questions in terms of the long term, though. There is an unanswered question about whether this is going to be a real end to that violence, because Netanyahu, who, by the way, is wanted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes, has a history of breaking ceasefires. We're witnessing that in Lebanon right now, where there is a one-sided ceasefire, where there are literally thousands of Israeli violations of that ceasefire ongoing in Lebanon. So is Gaza potentially going to go back to that kind of model where there's low-intensity warfare against Gaza instead of large-scale? And the other question is whether Gaza is going to be allowed to be rebuilt, because Gaza currently in complete ruins with 92% of housing simply dismantled and destroyed is not really fit for human habitation. And if, Israel systematically destroyed Gaza as part of an effort to push the Palestinian population out. So the big question right now is Gaza going to be rebuilt? Because if it is not, then this might, in fact, be kicking the can down the road and not creating conditions that allow for Palestinians to remain on their own land.
And what does security look like? What does governance look like? The president was asked some of these questions in the cabinet meeting. He kept things pretty vague. It's clear there are a lot of sensitivities. I think people are holding their breath, waiting for Monday or Tuesday to come. But what do you think that picture is going to look like?
What we've seen in the 20-point plan that Trump has presented is, frankly, in a way, kind of absurd. The idea that it's going to be governed by a board of peace that is led by Donald Trump himself and by Tony Blair, two people whose records, as far as the Middle East is concerned, in terms of war crimes and violations of rights, are not short.
But the involvement of other countries, because he's leaning a lot on that, of other Arab countries. How do you see that looking?
Sure. I mean, you can have some buy-in with some Arab support for a potential transitional governance in Gaza, but what you ultimately need is for Palestinians to be able to govern themselves, to be a free people in their own land, and that seems to be nowhere on the table in these conversations. Donald Trump has not alluded to it, and worse yet, Benjamin Netanyahu has made clear that there is no possibility for a Palestinian state from his perspective. He's made that clear long before October 7th, and he's doubling down on that, saying that Israel is going to remain in complete control from the river to the sea, which means that Palestinians are going to be living under Israeli domination. And that is a dynamic. If that occupation stays, it's a dynamic that is going to essentially kick the can down the road and reproduce some sort of conflict later on, because we're not dealing with that fundamental problem.
To that point, one of the prerequisites for phase two is that Hamas relinquish arms and relinquish political control of the enclave. I mean, I have a lot of questions there, whether you believe that's possible, and also what happens then to the enclave. Who then steps in?
Yeah, I think Hamas is willing and had made it clear actually a while back that they're willing to give up governing Gaza as a way of just getting an end to this war. And I frankly think that there could be a recipe by which you get disarmament in exchange for Palestinians being actually free. The problem is that there's no trust there. We have a dynamic, again, where when Israel makes it clear that it's going to continue dominating Gaza, when they made it clear that they're going to maintain a security perimeter inside Gaza, essentially remaining deeper inside Gaza than they were even before a couple of years ago when that suffocating siege was already in place, it's difficult to know what incentive there is for Hamas to completely follow through on relinquishing everything, because otherwise you're basically accepting that Palestinians must disarm and still remain occupied, and Hamas as sort of projecting a brand of resistance and insisting that they are the party that's going to fight for Palestinian freedom. When freedom is not on the table, I certainly see plenty of landmines down the road for why that might not work out. And still, in the meantime, though, that does not take anything away from what a breath of fresh air it is to see an end to the large-scale onslaught that we've witnessed for the past couple of years.
How are you seeing the prisoner release, right? Because at this point you have Hamas saying Israel's trying to manipulate a list of Palestinian prisoners scheduled to be released in the deal. Do you have a sense of exactly what is happening there? And also, there are a lot of concerns in Israel that they're releasing people who are only going to come back in the future and hurt them, which we've seen happen in the past.
Yeah, what we've seen, part of what happens here in this dynamic is that immediately in the aftermath of October 7th, what Israel did is essentially kidnap thousands of Palestinians off the streets in both Gaza and the West Bank. In many cases, those people are held without charge or trial. Essentially, frankly, the correct terminology from my perspective is to call them hostages, because that's what they are. You have a much smaller percentage of people who are convicted of committing crimes, but even that is complicated because the legal system in Israel, essentially Palestinians are living under military rule, and they go through military tribunals where there's a 99% conviction rate. So we don't really know who's innocent and who's actually committed a crime and who's simply guilty of resisting the occupation in ways that are legitimate under international law. But nonetheless, I don't think that this is ultimately about the people who are you releasing and what they might do. There's always going to be people on both sides who are willing to commit acts of violence, and that's always an ever-present danger. What you actually need to do is solve the political injustice underneath. And that's when these extremists that exist would lose support, both within Palestine and Israel. And the problem, of course, is that as long as the dynamic is Israel insisting that their solution to the problem is to keep the boot of occupation on the necks of Palestinians, that's somehow going to guarantee security. If the past several decades have not proven to you that this does not work, I don't know what it will take. We have to try something different. That different thing is allowing Palestinians to be free in their own land. And we need external pressure on Israel to take that seriously, to recognize Palestinian humanity, and to say that any rights that Israelis are entitled to, certainly Palestinians should be entitled to as well.